Chapter 20, Sing Down the Moon. I'm going to start off on page 107, and I think I'm going to read chapter 20 and 21. Before snow came, when the first north wind blew, my mother and I and my sister started to work, strengthening our hut. Tallboy's father knew one of the long knives. I think that he gave the soldier a valuable belt of silver and turquoise. Whatever it was, the white man gave him a speckled horse, too old for the soldiers to ride any longer than they were going to kill. We borrowed the horse and went across the river and cut willow poles, which we used to buttress the thick walls and the sagging roof. Tallboy, besides getting the horse for us to use, helped put the poles in place and heap up the earth against them. This pleased my mother. She began to say a word to him now and then and even smiled a little when he was around. Therefore, I was not surprised that Tallboy's father came over one evening after we finished working on the hut and talked to my father. Then the next day, Tallboy's two uncles came over and talked. The talks went on every day until the new moon, and then they made a good marriage bargain, though my mother did not get the old speckled horse, which she wanted. Relatives came to the wedding. There were so many that all them could not get inside the hut. Tallboy went in first, then my father and me. Tallboy and I sat on a blanket in front of a basket of corn gruel and a jar of water with a ladle. My father crouched nearby. Relatives filed in and sat on both sides of us. Then my father made a cross with white corn pollen over the gruel and a circle around the cross. First I dipped water with the ladle and poured it over Tallboy's hands, and he did the same to me. Then he dipped a finger into the basket toward the east and ate a pinch of the gruel, and I ate a pinch also. We ate pinches from all the different directions. Then the wedding was over, and everyone came forward and began to feast. The elders, as they feasted, gave me advice about being married. One aunt told me not to scold. My unmarried aunt told me to be patient. Two others told me the same thing. My cousin told me to be polite to everyone, even to strangers. There was advice until the relatives left at sundown, but I was so excited that I did not hear much of it. Our hut was too small before Tallboy moved in with us. Now there was no room, so we made a lean-to of willow poles and earth nearby. It was really more of a cave, and in it we stored the things we did not use every day and food if we had more than we needed, which was not often. Snow came early that year and melted, and then a freeze came with a cold wind, and the earth was as hard as stone. The white soldiers drove their wagons through the village every week and ladled out flour, but the ladles were smaller than they had been in the summer. Flour always ran low before the wagons came again, and people began to go hungry, all but the Apaches, who were fed first. Once more, there was talk that the Long Knives wanted us to die. Before winter was all over, the Navajo would starve to death, and the old men said. Snow fell and the wind piled it up around our hut, so we had to dig a tunnel to go out. People fell sick and died. Scarcely a day went by that you did not hear a chant for the dead, the wind blowing and the voices singing. Oftentimes, it was hard to tell one from the other. It was then, at the time the big snow melted, when so many were dying, that I made up my mind. My husband and I had gone down to the river, using the old speckled horse to gather firewood. After the wood was cut and loaded on the horse, we stood on the bank for a while to get our breath. The gray walls of the fort were the color of the sky, and the sky was the color of the land stretching away in the sunless morning. Some soldiers marched up and down, beating on drums and blowing horns. I said to my husband, I think of our canyon. I see it before I go to sleep, sometimes in my dreams, and always when I wake up. I see the high stone cliffs and the trees standing against the sky. I see my sheep wandering about with no one to tend to them. They are not wandering now, he said. The wolves have killed them, and there are none left. You had better think of something else besides sheep. His words made me angry, though I did not show it. Some are still alive, I said. That is why I see them. He looked at me as if I had turned into a witch. If some are alive, why is it that I do not see them? He said, do you have a true eye or something that I lack? I suppose I see them because I want to, I said, and you do not see them because you do not want to. I never had any sheep to see, Tallboy said. A few goats, but no sheep. But you can see the canyon if you look, I said. You were born there and lived there as a boy and grew to be a man. It was your home, and it still is. His long hair was braided into 2 ropes that lay forward on his chest. He tossed both of them back. I do not want to think of the canyon, he said. My father does not want to think of the canyon either, I said. This is not the time to think about the canyon, he said, and shouted to the horse. We climbed the river bank and set off toward our hut. The white soldiers were still marching around the fort. I said nothing more that day about the canyon or the sheep, but I made up my mind as we went back through the village, past the rows of brush huts where people shivered and were dying. Within the rising and waning of 5 moons, my baby would be born. It will not be born here in the shadow of the grave fort, I said to myself. Not here. Chapter 21. There was no wool to be found anywhere in the village, and when I asked one of the Long Knives if there was wool at the fort, he did not answer. I thought that he did not understand Navajo, so I made the sign of a blanket and weaving. He sat on a horse beside the wagon that was bringing us flour. He looked away and said nothing. Soon afterward, I traded my turquoise bracelet for 3 old blankets of a fine black and white design. By taking one of them apart, I was able to save enough thread to repair the other 2. The family used them at night, but I took good care of them, for they would go with us the day Tallboy and I left Bosque Redondo. I was a long time saving food. Every morning when I made the gruel for the family, I put 2 pinches of flour into a gourd and hid it away in the lean-to. At breakfast, I ate 2 pinches less than the others, so things would be even. It took me all the mornings between 2 moons to fill the gourd, which was enough for a journey of 3 days. The next time the wagon came, the white soldiers gave us less flour than before, and I did not try to save any of it. Still, there was enough for the 2 of us if we could find some other food along the way. I told Tallboy about the blankets and the food I had hidden in the lean-to. It is a foolish idea that has hold of you, he said. Before we cross the river, they will find our tracks in the snow. We can go when the snow melts, I said. We can go at night in fair weather and leave no tracks for them to find. He shook his head and looked at me gently as if he felt pity for me. We will talk about it more sometime, he said, turning away. I knew that he would never think of it again unless I did. He was like someone who was under a spell. He was like my father, like all the Navajo men, as if he had been forsaken by the gods. But I did not give up my plans for us to flee Bosque Redondo. A few days later, we borrowed the speckled horse and went down to the river to cut firewood. It was also growing scarce, and we had to search to find a tree worth cutting. We wandered through the river thickets all morning, but had only half a load to show for our work. At noon, we went back to where the old horse was tethered. My black dog growled before we got there, and I saw an Apache standing beside the horse. Tallboy spoke a greeting. The Indian did not answer. Instead, he pointed to the wood on the horse's back. Mine, he said. The wood belonged to Apache. Tallboy untied the horse, humming a little song to himself, which was a sign that he was angry. You get wood on Apache land, said the young Indian. No good, no like. He stepped in front of the horse as if he meant to keep it from moving away. As the horse started to walk away or around him, he reached out and gave it a blow on the muzzle. The horse had been given many blows in his life from the way he looked, and he just stopped and waited. But Tallboy walked over and took a length of wood down from the horse's back. He gripped it hard in one good hand. The Apache had a square chest and spindly legs. He squinted his eyes, which were black as a lizard's, and glanced at the length of wood Tallboy held in his hand. Then he took a step toward my husband, raising a fist. Tallboy struck quickly as a snake strikes. The blow landed on the Apache's outthrust arm. He dropped the stone he held in his fist. A second blow knocked him off his feet, and he fell in the snow and lay there stunned. We took the horse and went home. I looked back and saw the Apache get to his feet and stagger off. That night, while we were eating supper, 2 soldiers came. They walked into the hut without saying a word and took Tallboy away. I could not sleep that night thinking about him. My father went to the fort the next morning, and I went with him. There was a big gate in the wall. It was closed, and we stood outside in the snow, waiting for it to open, but no one came all day. The next morning, we went back to the gate. We waited until noon, and then it opened, and a soldier took us into a courtyard. We waited there until the sun went down. Then a soldier came out and told us to leave, but to come back in the morning, which we did. All morning we walked up and down in the courtyard trying to keep warm. About noon, a long knife led us into a room where two men sat. One of them was a soldier and the other a Ute Indian, who told us what the officer said and told him what we answered. The white officer had blue eyes and a red beard. He wore a hat with a gold cord around it and asked me what my name was. Bright Morning, I told him. I did not give him my secret name, and he did not ask for it. Bright Morning, he said, tell me what happened when you were gathering wood. It was bad manners for him to say my name when I was standing there in front of him, but perhaps he did not know this, so I told him everything that happened by the river as I remembered it. I said, Tallboy is my husband, and he is needed at home. Magnus the Apache has a home too, and he is needed, the soldier said, but he has a broken arm and cannot work. Neither the riverbank nor the wood that grows there belongs to him, I said. The arm is his fault. The officer looked at me sharply with his blue eyes. Whose fault is it, he said, is for me to decide, not you. He began to look at the papers on his desk. The soldier took us to the gate and let us out, and we walked home through snow that was beginning to fall. What are the Long Knives going to do with him? I asked my father. He has done no wrong, my father answered. It is not wrong to yield yourself from a man with a stone. They will send him home soon. And then for these pages in your learning journal, page 26 is vocabulary, so you're going to match those words up. And then the activity, it says to list 3 major cultural misunderstandings between the Navajo and the Long Knives. So what, and one of them simply could be, for example, you know how she said he doesn't know that it's wrong to call me by my first name in front of me. And she answered anyways, but, you know, in their culture, that's something that the Long Knives didn't understand about the Navajo. So you might want to put the page number even to help you along, and then put maybe 2 more besides the one I just gave you. So good luck.